The clink of silverware and the low hum of evening conversation filled the small corner restaurant, wrapping it in a cocoon of gentle light and warmth that contrasted sharply with the chill outside. The windows, slightly fogged from the heat inside, reflected the soft glow of hanging bulbs that swung lazily with the occasional draft from the front door. In the far corner, by the window, sat a woman alone at a table for two. Her name was Amelia. She wore a simple navy dress, one she had bought years ago when she still thought she might attend more dinners, more parties, more anything. The fabric had faded a little around the edges, but it was pressed neatly, and she had taken care to smooth out every wrinkle before she left the house. It was her first dinner out in months, maybe a year, though she couldn't remember exactly when she had last done something like this just for herself. The waiter had asked her earlier, "Will anyone be joining you, ma'am?" She'd smiled politely, shaking her head, and said, "No, it's just me tonight." There was something about saying those words out loud that made them heavier than she expected. Just me. She felt them land somewhere deep, like a pebble dropped into still water, rippling through her composure. She'd come here for a reason she couldn't quite articulate, not loneliness, not exactly. Maybe to remind herself that she was still part of the world that existed outside bedtime stories, grocery aisles, and late-night budgeting on her kitchen counter. Her son, Noah, was at home with her neighbor, Mrs. Patel, who had kindly offered to watch him for the evening. "Go on, you deserve a night, Mrs. Patel had insisted, pressing her arm with motherly encouragement. And so she came, though even as she sat now, tracing her finger over the rim of her glass of water, she felt out of place, like someone who had wandered onto the wrong stage in the middle of a play. Her mind drifted, as it often did, to Noah. He was 7 now, curious, bright-eyed, full of questions about everything. He was her reason for getting up every morning, her reason for fighting through exhaustion and bills and the constant ache of doing it all alone. His father had left when Noah was 2, leaving nothing behind but a note that said, "I'm not ready for this life." Amelia had burned the note once she realized that forgiveness was a luxury she couldn't afford. Since then, she had built her life around routines, school drop-offs, part-time work at a marketing firm, freelance projects squeezed in after Noah went to bed. Every penny mattered, every decision calculated. She was tired, yes, but proud of what she had managed to hold together. Still, there were moments, like now, when the quiet pressed too close, when she wished someone would just see her. Not as the single mom, not as the responsible one, but as a woman, capable, flawed, and sometimes lonely. The waiter approached again. "Would you like to order, ma'am?" he asked softly, almost apologetically. She nodded and ordered the house special, her voice steady but small. After he left, she watched couples at nearby tables, the easy laughter, the shared glances, the way hands brushed across tablecloths without thinking. She looked down at her phone, scrolling through messages that weren't there, and then, embarrassed by her own reflex, she set it face down beside her plate. The restaurant's front door opened again, letting in a gust of cool air and a faint murmur of the city outside. She didn't look up at first. People came and went, it was nothing special. But then, a voice spoke near the entrance, low and familiar, the kind of voice that carried quiet authority. It wasn't loud, but it drew attention, not by force but by presence. She glanced up and froze. The man, who had just entered, was tall, dressed in a dark coat that looked too refined for the cozy setting. His hair was swept back in a way that looked effortless but deliberate, and his expression, calm, unreadable, was the kind that made people instinctively move aside for him without quite knowing why. He spoke briefly to the host, who nodded and gestured toward the back. The man's gaze swept over the room as if scanning it, and for a moment, just one moment, his eyes caught hers. Amelia looked away quickly, heat rising to her cheeks. She didn't know why her heart had suddenly picked up speed. Maybe it was the intensity in his eyes, or maybe it was simply that she wasn't used to being noticed. Not anymore. The man, she'd later learn his name was Ethan Cole, moved past her table toward the corner booth nearby, the one reserved for regulars or people who made reservations weeks in advance. The waitstaff seemed to recognize him immediately. There was a flurry of quiet, efficient movement, a bottle of wine opened, a glass poured, the best dishes offered without being asked. Whoever he was important here. Amelia tried to focus on her meal when it arrived, but her mind kept drifting. Every so often she felt his gaze flick toward her. Or maybe she was imagining it. She wasn't the kind of woman who drew attention in places like this. She ate slowly, savoring each bite, determined not to rush, not to look lonely. Yet, the empty chair across from her seemed to mock her no matter how she tried to ignore it. Halfway through her meal, a family entered, parents with 2 small children who were all smiles and chatter. They passed her table, and she smiled at the kids automatically. One of them giggled, waving. The father smiled back at her, polite and brief, before turning to his wife. The smallest, a girl with curly hair, asked loudly, "Why is that lady sitting alone?" The mother shushed her quickly, whispering something about manners, but Amelia caught it all. Her chest tightened, and she forced a small smile, pretending it didn't sting. But it did. She was about to ask for the check when she noticed movement in her periphery. Ethan had stood up. He was walking toward her. She blinked, unsure if it was coincidence, but his steps were deliberate, unhurried. When he stopped beside her table, the quiet around them thickened, the air charged with something she couldn't quite name. He leaned slightly toward her, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Pretend I'm your husband," he murmured. Amelia froze, fork halfway to her mouth. What?" she whispered back, her heart stumbling in confusion. He straightened, giving her a reassuring look, as if he expected her not to understand but to trust him anyway. His eyes, gray, steady, and oddly kind, met hers directly. "Please," he said softly, "just for a minute. I'll explain." Before she could reply, before her brain could even catch up, he pulled out the chair across from her and sat down, smoothly, as if he'd done it 100 times before. The waiter, who had been approaching with her check, stopped mid-step, looked at Ethan, and smiled politely. "Ah, Mr. Cole," he greeted. "Would you and your wife like dessert?" Wife. The word hung in the air between them, both foreign and absurd. Amelia blinked, her lips parting slightly, but Ethan gave her a barely perceptible shake of his head, a silent plea to go along, at least for now. Her instinct warred with curiosity, but something in his demeanor, calm, confident, not threatening, made her nod faintly. "Yes, thank you," Ethan said, his tone smooth, practiced. "We'll take a look at the menu." The waiter smiled and walked away. The silence that followed felt impossible. Amelia stared at him, her pulse still racing. "What on earth are you doing?" she hissed under her breath. He sighed, leaning back slightly. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I didn't mean to startle you. There's a woman near the bar, tall, red dress, black hair. She's been waiting for me for 20 minutes. I don't want to see her. We used to date, and she doesn't seem to understand that it's over." His eyes flicked briefly toward the bar, and Amelia followed his gaze. Sure enough, there was a woman sitting there, striking, elegant, her gaze fixed in their direction with a mix of irritation and curiosity. Amelia's lips parted again, but this time in disbelief. "So, your solution was to pretend to be married." It was the first thing that came to mind, he said, his mouth twitching with the faintest trace of a smile. "You were sitting alone. It was an opportunity." "An opportunity," she repeated, incredulous. "You're unbelievable." "Probably," he admitted. "But I'm harmless. And very grateful, if you're willing to play along." Amelia looked at him for a long moment, then down at her plate, then back up again. "This is ridiculous," she murmured, but her tone had softened. "I don't even know your name." "Ethan," he said immediately, extending a hand across the table. His smile this time was warm, almost boyish. "Ethan Cole." After a brief hesitation, she took it. "Amelia," she said quietly. His hand was firm, steady, but not imposing. "Well, Amelia," he said, lowering his voice, "you may have just saved me from an uncomfortable evening." She shook her head, half amused, half still bewildered. "You owe me an explanation, and probably a new meal, because mine's gone cold." He chuckled softly, the sound surprisingly genuine. "Fair deal." For a while, they talked, at first awkwardly, then with an ease that surprised both of them. Ethan told her about his company, though in vague terms, and she shared a little about her work without mentioning the struggles behind it. There was something about the absurdity of the situation that made honesty easier. Their laughter blended naturally, drawing a few curious glances from other diners, but neither of them noticed much anymore. The woman in the red dress eventually gave up and left, the click of her heels fading into the night. Ethan noticed but didn't mention it right away. When he finally told Amelia she was gone, she smiled faintly and said, "So, mission accomplished, Mr. Cole." He looked at her then, really looked, not as a prop in his hastily improvised lie, but as a person. "Yes," he said quietly. "But I think I might have gotten more than I bargained for." Something in his tone made her heart skip again. She quickly looked away, tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear. "You mean a free alibi?" He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Something like that." When the waiter returned with the dessert menu, Ethan gestured toward it. "May I?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Fine, but you're paying. I wouldn't dream of doing otherwise." He ordered something chocolate, and when it arrived, they shared it, laughing when the spoon clinked against the plate at the same time. The tension melted, replaced by a warmth that felt strange but welcome. Amelia found herself smiling more than she had in months. As the evening wound down, the restaurant emptied. The lights dimmed a little, softening the edges of everything. When Ethan offered to walk her out, she hesitated only briefly before agreeing. The night air was crisp, the city alive with distant sounds, taxis, laughter, music spilling faintly from nearby bars. They stood by the curb for a moment, the world slowing around them. "I really am sorry for dragging you into that," Ethan said quietly. "You didn't have to help me." She smiled softly, hugging her coat closer. "It's fine. I'm just not sure how I'll explain to my babysitter that my pretend husband bought me dessert." He chuckled, a genuine sound that made her laugh too. "Well," he said, "maybe you can tell her you met a man who owed you a favor." "I'll say he was mysterious, bossy, and slightly insane," she countered. "That sounds accurate." They both stood there, smiling, neither wanting to end the moment too quickly. Then a cab pulled up, headlights washing over them. Amelia turned to go, but he caught her hand lightly, just enough to stop her. "Can I see you again?" he asked. His voice was softer now, almost uncertain. She hesitated. "You don't even know me. I know you looked like someone who didn't deserve to eat dinner alone," he said simply. "That's enough for now." She didn't answer right away. Then, slowly, she smiled. "We'll see," she said, stepping into the cab. As it drove away, Ethan stood on the curb, watching the taillights disappear into the city's rhythm. Inside the car, Amelia looked out the window, her reflection mingling with the blur of lights. For the first time in a long time, she felt something shift, small, fragile, but real. Something that felt like the beginning of a story she hadn't planned to be part of.